Hi. All right. Thank you for joining me today, and I'm joined today by a good friend of mine. Feel free to introduce yourself, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, it's Aledos here.
All right.
What's up?
Thank you, Aledos, for joining me. We're going to be taking a look at a post from the We Will Teach You League community, the school community. If this is a community focused on taking accountability when you play, trying to forge a positive relationship with the game, and overall treating it seriously, and something with respect. And this specific post we're going to talk about today is most high elo players get bad advice. This is kind of talking about how sometimes you hear my line I quoted was just CS more. Like when people tell someone to just farm more gold, it's like the advice is accurate, it's true, but it doesn't cover the details of what's really needed to actually improve or how to do it. Um, there's a short 6 minute video we're gonna watch here because I don't think you've seen it, Alados, and it's gonna
Yeah, I
show
haven't seen
actually
it.
how people who are in teaching positions or who say things sometimes can say things that are actually flat out just incorrect to what they're actually doing. But okay, you ready to watch the video,
Yeah, sure.
or do you want to read the rest of the post? It's pretty short, but
Yeah. Let's read the post first, and
all
then
right, it's okay. This is in interest to the two coaches who run the community, and it's a video of a basketball coach that explains how to shoot the ball. What's fascinating, they say, is they show how even real pro players say how to shoot versus how they really shoot. So they're saying the pros say to do one thing, but they do a different thing themselves. And the belief is the same true of high elo players in league. Like they reach their decisions intuitively, they make actions, what they feel is the right action, but they're not always aware of what that action is. And then when they try to explain it to someone else, they might actually just explain it wrong. And the ability to describe information that you understand is not synonymous with your ability to know how to do it. Like they're two different skills, in my opinion. But we'll get more into that later. All right. So ready to watch the video?
yeah, let's go.
Actually, I have it open in this tab here. Let me pop this over here. There's a bit of an intro that we just can skip through because it's just a. Okay, so there's
There
big
are
little.
little lies,
Yep. Yep.
I don't think this really.
and there are big lies.
We know he's got him.
The truth. To subscribe to our also, lie number one, lies. Lie number one, square up. Whether you are talking about squaring the feet, squaring the shoulders, or squaring the hips is all irrelevant. Truth is truth, even if no one believes it. And a lie is a lie, even if everyone believes it. And being square to shoot a basketball is not good for today's one-handed shooters. Like many of the best shooters, Stephen Curry has been shooting almost his entire life. Many would say Curry is the greatest shooter of all time. But even Steph once believed this lie.
You should have your 10 toes facing squared up to the rim. The consistent thing across the board with all great shooters is those 10 toes facing in the same direction. Your hips and your chest are going to follow that same pattern.
But when you say one thing and do the other, it should raise a lot of questions. Steph turns his feet, his hips, and his shoulders to shoot. So why do we so often hear that you should square up? Well, let's take a look at the origins of squaring up. The two-handed set shot was how basketball players shot in the early 1900s well into the 1950s. Back then, the game was a much different game with different rules than we know today. In the 1920s, there were a few players that came along and were shooting an unorthodox one-handed shot. Soon after came the jump shot. The two-handed shot stuck around until the 1950s due to coaches' resistance to change. As coaches slowly adapted and changed their philosophy and beliefs, something unfortunate happened. They started promoting a one-handed shot, but they kept their old terminology. So much so, it pollutes our teaching of today's more efficient modern techniques. Like beef, a shooting acronym created by former NBA standout George Lehman.
As a right-hand shooter, I have one foot in front of the other. We refer to this as the boxer or staggered stance. You'll notice my feet are not too wide or too close. I'm on balance at all time, one foot in front of the other. A right-hand shooter will lead with his right foot. A left-hand shooter will lead with his left foot to maintain proper balance.
There is nothing about squaring up in beef. Even the first book ever published on shooting in 1965 by NBA standout Bill Sharman shows a turn, not square. If you dare to square, your shooting will suffer just like some of the worst free throw shooters of all time. Keeping the feet parallel and equal distance to the basket will force the hips and the shoulders to square. It also results in a very unnatural, uncomfortable, and unsuccessful shot. Unless, of course, you want to shoot a two-handed shot or Rick Barry's infamous two-handed underhand free throw. Let's just look at some of the greatest shooters, and you will see how they turn to open their shoulders. Number one free throw shooter of all time, Elena Deladon, a career 93.8% free throw shooter. Number 3 all-time, Steve Nash. Number 4 all-time, Mark Price. Number 5 all-time, Peja Stojakovic. Number 6 all-time, Chauncey Billups. And now, let's go back to number 2 all-time, Stephen Curry. Remember how he told us to square up?
Wait for it. Keep waiting.
I usually have my feet about 10 to 15 degrees pointed to the left.
Let's stop believing the lies, and let's learn to listen with our eyes.
Squaring up is squaring your feet, your shoulders, your hips, and your elbow to the basket. It's always easier to make the basket that way.
The best youth, high school, college, and pro shooters use a turn in the shoulders, hips, and feet to become successful shooters.
Okay. So that covers the core of the video.
Right.
I feel like there's a specific part I want to cover real quick and highlight. This guy who does like the beef guy, this guy, he actually is an example of what I want to say is a great communicator. Like, when you hear him talking here,
As a right-hand shooter, I have one foot in front of the other. We refer to this as the boxer or staggered stance. You'll notice my feet are not too wide or too close.
like he's explaining the details of it really nice and precisely. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's what really good communication skill looks like. Now,
Right.
when we go back to the school post, there's been like a few comments on it, but I want to skip right towards my comment because then we'll go through the others if you like. But
Okay.
I talk about there's a term for what this kind of knowledge is called. Whenever there's this stuff that people know implicitly, but it's hard for them to explain, that is tacit knowledge. It's implicit knowledge, things that people know, but it's like difficult to express or extract, difficult to transfer to others, like personal wisdom, experience, insight, intuition, how to ride a bicycle, how to speak a language, how to knead dough, play a musical instrument. These are all things that, yes, like if you understand how to explain it really well, you can do so. But like if you don't know how to explain it, but you can know how to do it, perform it, you can't put it into words always.
Right.
Does that make
Right.
sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
good. Finishing off what I wrote, I give an example of something I understand the tacit knowledge of, which is when you're cutting vegetables, you have to know like how much force should you apply with the knife, and in what direction are you applying it? How are you orienting your body when you're cutting it? Like which foot is forwards, which foot is back? How are you turning yourself towards the cutting board? How are you holding the knife in your hand? Do you make the cut with your wrist or your arm? How do you position your hand that's holding the vegetables in place? And another important question is just what kind of knife are you trying to use to cut them? These are all elements of just how do you cut the vegetables.
How do you
But
think this translates to league advice?
oh, because like when you're trying to say CS better, what goes into CSing better? Timing, distance, like how you CS them with abilities or with your auto attacks. how you're prepping CS in advance. Like, those are all elements of CSing better.
So do you believe that a lot of high-low people give bad advice?
I think that a lot of high-low
Because
players
of
don't
the...
understand how to explain their advice.
What kind of like high-low people advice have you heard so far?
I
Like,
mean,
that were actually like implicitly wrong based on this. Like,
it's not that they're wrong.
that
No, that's the thing. It's not that they're wrong. It's that they just fail to reach the important stuff.
So it's more like it's less understandable.
Yeah, it's like they are like translating something that's right but unhelpful.
But the video kind of is about like a different thing, no? I feel like it's
It
actually
is
like
like the video talks about like things that are
squaring
just
up as
misconceptions.
like
Yeah, no, the video set squaring up is like talking specifically about a misconception, like which there are plenty of in League. There's plenty of misconceptions in League.
Yeah, I mean for sure.
But yeah. I'm trying to find actually if there's a good example.
Because I agree, like a lot of advice that high-low people can or might give is not easy to implement for low-elo people.
Especially if that high-low
I've
player
seen that,
it doesn't
like,
have a lot of experience giving their advice.
Yeah, yeah.
Honestly, I feel
I mean,
like teaching is a skill.
Yeah.
And when people are first learning how to teach, they suck.
Absolutely.
I don't care how good you are at the game. You will suck at teaching when you start.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure.
And your advice, even if it was great advice, it's not going to work. You're probably going to give it to someone, and it will just fail for them.
Yeah, I mean, you have to...
Because you don't realize what you know and they
You have
don't.
to go through like trial and error, and learn how to communicate.
Because the burden of like you know all this information the client doesn't, so you're not going to like be aware of that at first. That they won't understand or know this fact or details that I'm describing.
Yeah.
They're not going to know how to walk the tightrope.
It was shocking when I first joined as a mentor in the MLA. Now I think it's called the MLA now. It was shocking to me, like how little people know about the game. And I mean, it kind of just made me very deliberate with how I explain stuff based on the level of play of the players, and ask a lot of times like if they understand what I'm saying, because I feel like in my coaching as well, I feel I need to be very precise with information that I might assume that somebody just knows. I have to be precise with, let's say, if I tell them just like hold the wave on your side, someone might not even understand like
what goes into that, like how you do that and how you execute that.
Like how do you do that, or like what's even a wave like?
Yeah, like do they know about how to like
right?
hold like the wave outside the tower to drag it back?
Yeah,
like in top lane, players don't always know that you can drag the wave.
Like, have the wave on your side, like like it means that the enemy has to have like a minion advantage.
Or it knows like I know that like when the wave like I have no minions, I can physically drag the minions further back into the lane.
Yeah, right. But as like
a new player, they
don't know
that.
This advice to like a bronze player,
they'd have no idea about that.
Yeah, exactly. And how do you teach Kassadin? Like, have the wave push to you, and people might not even understand that, right?
Yeah.
So
like we talked about the concept of like you queue your opponent as Kassadin, and that will get minions to aggro you, so you can actually potentially farm that minion.
Yeah.
Like that's a concept that people like they wouldn't understand at first.
I mean, you have to see it in action. I feel like a lot of this advice as well is once you have like a visual.
Well, that's
like
the
visual
thing.
Understanding of like what's happening.
My argument is that my last statement in this sentence is that I believe there are some people whose attention to detail enables them to isolate and identify nuances of process, similar to what I've done with the demonstration of how to like chop vegetables. And the people who have linguistic prowess to put these things into words can do that, like describing what other people do without even thinking about it.
Right.
Like I can look at something and identify the parts and elements of it that make it what it is. That's at least my personal talent is like I just get good at breaking down things I look at.
Right.
And that's like when that guy was describing that process of how you shoot and stand. Like he's talking about the specific positioning of the feet. Which foot is forwards by how much?
Yeah.
Like I can see that details he's pointing out.
Yeah, I mean it's like if I was to look at a clip right now about like Kassadin laning or whatever it is,
Mhm.
I could tell you exactly like the things that are going on, and I could tell you like how to replicate them step by step. But yeah, it would be really hard to give like specific advice to a beginner based on like that gameplay specifically
Well, I think
for
that
somebody
you
that
just
has
said,
never
like,
done that.
if you saw a beginner playing Kassadin, you could tell him exactly what he needs to do.
Absolutely, I could. But like a random high elo player, he would just see like a million mistakes at the same time and be like,
And you wouldn't know how to,
oh,
like, remedy them either.
yeah.
Like,
Like
he would see
you
them,
would
but he'd be
have
like, how do I
to
remedy that? Like, tell the player what to fix it.
like you see 200 mistakes in like 10 seconds, right?
Yeah.
And how do you prioritize? How do you like communicate, and how do you break it down in a way that
Typically,
like
I find,
doesn't share too much information, doesn't share the wrong information,
or, like,
and is
doesn't, like,
also like
just
useful?
discourage the player, be like, you know, you can't be doing
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, because you don't want to put them in like the valley of despair of like
Like, hopelessness.
the Dunning-Kruger effect curve, like you don't
Yeah,
want to put
no,
them in the
that
like
is actually
nowadays
so
it's
important you
lost
mention that,
hope,
because
right?
that is a danger of bad coaching, is, like, you can fuck up someone else, I mean, you can mess up someone else's, like, journey
Yeah, yeah.
with your, like, perspective and your thoughts. Like, you prevent them from just experimenting.
I feel like the key of like good coaching is finding the simplicity of the information you share and share only the key informations in a very simple and understandable and consumable way. Because the moment, like, let's say I have a bronze client, right? The only way I will be successful at coaching them is that I find their actual next step and communicate it to them simply so that they can actually like start their new game
Can I offer
and start
exchange of
implementing.
wording? Simple
Sure.
for explicit.
What do you mean by that?
Explicit is very clear and defined. It's not like at all like unclear.
Yes.
So it's not simple though, because simple implies that it's basic, or it's like, you know, like
At their current level of play, it has to be clear and simple. It has to
no,
be
so
simple
it,
because if I share like a concept that's more complex, even if it's understandable, it will
well,
be it will lose value from complexity.
well, that's the thing. Explicit is like there's no ambiguity at all. Like complex implies there's ambiguity about how it's going to be applied. Like when do I use this, or like when do I do that? Explicit is like, okay, to hold the wave, you know, to hold a freeze, don't let the Marinians reach your tower. Like hold the wave and face tank it if you have to. That's a really
Sure.
explicit statement.
Sure.
Because sometimes
But
players who
is
don't
it
have
simple?
minions, they'll actually do not hold the wave in front of the tower like that. They won't tank the wave.
Sure. But is it simple to understand?
If you have, okay, if you have a wave, you're freezing, and your wave dies, hold the wave by taking damage of the wave.
Sure. But this is where I think we disagree. Because I feel like that's explicitly clear, but it's not simple enough for implementation immediately.
So why is it not
Like
simple?
you don't know when to do this. You
Yeah,
don't
no,
know
okay, so
when to like,
that's the complexities actually.
yeah.
And that's the thing is I'm
And
saying
that's why you have to simplify stuff. Because I feel like even though like this can be explicitly clear, it still has to be simple in order to be implemented.
so actually here's what I would say. When I'm giving these kind of concepts, it would be in relation to something. So someone tried to freeze and it didn't work. Like
Okay.
they tried to execute a freeze in their game and it failed.
Right.
That's
right.
the scenario where I would say if you want to execute a freeze, this is the mechanical way it's done. Now, when to do it is something they still need to build up and learn. So they try to execute a freeze in a different game we look at. They use the proper technique, but it doesn't work out. If we look at, okay, what caused the freeze to fail? Or like, why did it not work out for them? Okay, you took too much damage because this wave is too large. That's a learning step. They build upon their previous knowledge. They executed the freeze properly, but it took way too much damage.
Right.
And I think that style of learning is better because they get to feel the parts of it build up. They get to execute it correctly, even if it doesn't like have a good long-term outcome. They got to see why did that long-term outcome not work in that scenario. The knowledge is built up.
do you feel like don't you feel that sometimes I see this with a lot of clients when let's say they have like let's say they have like a certain area of curiosity. Like let's say they want to learn freezing, right?
Yeah.
And or like wave management or whatever it is. Like some clients really have like these like fun parts
Areas
or
of
like
interest.
enjoy.
They have areas
Exactly,
of interest.
exactly. So a lot of the times what I feel like is that I could give them like very specific and very explicit like how to freeze this wave advice, and sometimes I feel like that's just like not gonna serve them to focus on that at all. Because it might not be simple.
I think you're trying to protect them from failing. Like, you should tell them how to freeze, and then if they fail to do it right, let that be a lesson that they can learn from. But you should be telling them how to do the thing correctly. Them applying it wrong is a moment for them to learn.
I just wonder if like because that's I think like that goes back to like high-low players giving bad advice. Because I feel like depending, I guess, what's the goal of giving advice? If you have a like specific explicit question, I think you can answer that, and any high-low player can probably answer that very correctly. Like if you ask me like how does a freeze look like,
No, not how do
I
you
would
do
be
it? How
able
do
to
you
tell you.
execute it? Very specific
Yeah.
details of it.
And I could tell you exact steps of
Yeah.
like, yeah, you need the enemy to have more minions than you. You need the wave to be closer to your tower than the enemy tower. I could even tell you like how many more minions or how much
Well,
more minion HP you need, right?
the thing is actually, like, that's why I referenced that technique of dragging the minions back physically. You don't need as many
Yeah.
minions to freeze if you have, like, if you drag them further away.
Yeah, exactly. But those are like different concepts that go into freezing a wave, right?
Yeah.
I think when I think about high-low players giving bad advice, is when the question is not asked, but they have to come up with like what questions need to be answered to begin with.
One other
I
thing
think
is, like,
that's
actually,
when like
high-elo players a lot of times disregard the questions of lower elo players because they view it as not the issue.
sure.
Like, I've done this myself.
What
I
do you
know. It's
mean?
like a player asks me, "How do I deal with Yone?" And I'm like, I tell him, "You don't need to worry about how to deal with Yone right now. It's like you just gotta learn how to do basic laning." But I'm realizing he wants to know how Yone's kit works, so if he runs into Yone again, he knows how to be prepared.
Yeah. There's two specific advices to be given, but when someone asks you like how do you deal with Yone as ex-champion, then you can tell like, okay, this
Oh
is how
yeah,
you
I
do it.
remember the reason I didn't give advice there is because I think the Yone was like diamond and this guy was a new player. It was a game of
Sure.
norms, and it's like he was new, I'm not, and it's like wow, this was not a good experience for him. And I tried to tell him like the Yones he will see in his regular games will not be like this player. So I wasn't really giving him advice on Yone because it just wouldn't apply to what he's gonna see.
Sure.
But I could have explained his kit to him because this guy is like really intellectual and like he's really high rated in chess, so he's got a good understanding of strategy and how things work. He just had never seen Yone before, so he wasn't prepared. This is like when Yone had lethal tempo, so he got really surprised.
You know what I think is very useful as well is that players that have like asks you like especially lower level or like new players, if they ask you on specific advice on like matchups and stuff, then the way you communicate that information actually gives them a framework of how to think about matchups to begin with, which I think is very like there. I think high-elo players have the responsibility to like share the information in a way that they would think about matchups themselves. Because if I say like, yeah, just don't get hit by his Q, then they might just think like, yeah, I didn't get hit by his Q, but I still got run down. But
For
if
this
I say
context,
like, yeah,
part of what made the situation hard is that the person I was playing with, he currently had played a new mid lane, and he had most of his matchups. He followed a template of like a flowchart almost of like what his actions are.
okay,
So he would start like with a full charge snowball on the wave, and he would just roll up into it and ignore the enemy laner at the start by just trying to like burst the wave. The Yone saw him
okay,
waste his snowball in the wave, and then just full all in level 1.
Yeah.
So it's like, it felt very hard to begin the topic, but I think if there's a minimum level of like, understanding of the game and like what like standard play looks like, I think that yeah, giving a model of how to approach a matchup is great. But it requires them to be following at least some degree of expected play patterns.
Yeah.
And that's what the
I mean,
early part of learning is about. It's like learning what does expected play patterns look like.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like also like if Nunu, let's say like Nunu was a very conventional mid laner and you knew like how to play Nunu, you could give like very good advice on the match.
Yeah, exactly. If he was more
You could say
conventional,
like, yeah, this is what you do level 1. You could give the flowchart kind of.
he's just playing something that's very off meta in like in a way that like it tries to play in ways that other champions just don't.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things. Like you're not high enough level on that specific aspect to give advice.
Well, I'm saying that this advice doesn't translate to anything else.
Yeah, it's specific.
It's not just that. It's like it's non-transferable advice. Like I give advice like if a mage is playing Yone, it doesn't matter what mage it is. I can probably give advice in that situation that would help him. Even if it's a melee, I could do the same thing. But it's like he's playing a champion that's trying to cheat the laning phase by trying to like one-shot the wave as fast as possible and then rotate to a different side lane.
Right, right.
And like that's how he wins.
He's trying to ignore the lane, right? But I mean that's where like a lot of matchups play differently. Like if you play.
You remember old Aesol?
Like, yeah.
What old Aesol would do with waves?
Yeah.
Like
I remember it.
That's kind of like similar to what this strategy is.
Yeah.
It's just.
I'm aware of Nunu and I'm aware of Nunu mid. It's not. It's more so just like if there is like a high elo one trick Nunu mid player, he can tell you so much like detail about how to play that matchup.
Yes. But this player wasn't asking about the matchup. He was asking about how to just deal with Yone. I guess maybe he was asking the question. I'm not gonna say he wasn't because it's possible.
If you cannot apply like you cannot apply your generic knowledge to like Nunu versus Yone, then how do you answer his questions?
It's more like actually the reason I didn't want to answer. The reason why I wasn't answering his question was because I identified that this is not knowledge I can give because I don't have that.
Yeah.
But it's like the knowledge I have, I was like, I can't give you the knowledge I have because your playstyle is just so far from what is actually like able to like I can
expertise. Yeah.
It's just like he's just playing so far off the radar.
If he's playing like
anything
I don't
normal,
know what champion he's playing, right? Like if you ask me the question how to beat Yone, I would ask you like, what are you playing?
Well, yeah.
And if you say like you're playing,
I mean,
mid,
actually, even if we're just talking about in isolation,
yeah,
like Yone is a champion who's got a very like you can predict when he's going to go in because when his Q3 is ready, it's got a limited duration. If he's wanting to use it in, like if you can get him so he tries to use his E first.
Yeah, but you're never giving like advice like that because
if I was talking to a more like experienced player, I would actually.
But a more experienced player doesn't ask like matchup specific advice.
Are you sure?
Like, champion, like how to play against this champion.
I mean, my good friend Juan, like he's in master and he asks questions like that because he's curious.
Do you answer them like in general?
No, I answer them in very like specific like form, like about the technical aspects of the champion. Like he playing against Rumble, and I explained to him that playing against Rumble is all about like Rumble's most important cooldown is a Z. Like his whole lane phase power is about does Rumble have his E's up?
Sure.
So if he Rumble wastes both E's, that's your window to all in versus him.
Sure.
So that was like a really technical answer for that.
But then again, like if you play into Rumble, like there are many champs that trade very differently. Like if you play like, I mean I don't know like what Rumble's matchups are, but if you play like Darius into Rumble, you're gonna play it very different than if you play like Maokai.
Well, I'm saying that in either position there, your big thing you're looking for is Rumble to waste his E's.
Sure, if you want to even trade.
Well, yes, this is
if
in
you
a position
even want to like do stuff, right?
Yeah, this is like assuming you want to go aggressive.
The way you think about the lane is different because your objective in the game is different if you're talking to a high level player.
Well, yeah, okay. If we're talking about like in situations, some champions aren't looking to win lane.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's a whole different like area than what I was referring to, because what I'm referring to is like a player who wants to win lane. They're in a matchup where it's possible to win.
Okay, so you're asking like how to trade and how to have a wave state in the lane.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to tell them
So
like
you're
how the
asking
other
what are the
champions
key
like.
coolдowns?
I'm thinking about like versus Fiora. Her most important tool is like her parry usage.
Right.
Versus Camille, it's like it's her E. Like these champions have a clear part of their gameplay that if you can like play around it, you can beat them.
Sure. But certain champions play differently. Like that's why I
Yeah,
think
no, it's
like
like
matchup specific context matters, because if you play like
well,
if you play like Fiora into Camille, like you will actually use your W very deliberately.
so here's what I'm
And
thinking about specifically for me. I played a long time Sivir, right?
sure.
Having a spell shield makes it so that you like while yes it's something that like is Sivir specific, it's something that any champion
Yeah, you
could
will think
have.
about like what spell you block, right?
Yeah, it's like if I remove a certain spell from a champion, how does it affect the trades?
Yeah.
Now, while I get to block it deliberately, a lot of spells you can dodge.
Yeah, exactly.
And you get that same scenario of the champion's combat is been changed, even if you are like nothing in
Right.
your champion has like caused them to do so.
Yeah. Like
So
when
like
I play Kassadin, yeah, I'm thinking about how like is there something I can use my Q or my ult reactively so I can dodge it and then do
well no,
damage
because
at the
in
same
that
time?
scenario your Q to do for, to dodge it would be you have to actually end the channel, right?
No,
What do you
I can
mean?
Q
But
immediately.
I'm saying that you're trying to say they have a channeled ability like a Fiddlesticks are, and you Q it.
No, I mean like I get Syndra Q'd and I Q the damage.
Oh, so you block it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's actually fair because a lot of champions have shelf shielding and such.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
yeah, that's an example of like
that's
that's a
one
Syndra
specific
thing.
thing where like I asked players that play Kassadin like, okay, is there anything you can Q reactive in the enemy's kit? Is there anything you can dodge with your ult in the enemy's kit? Is there like a main cooldown that they use that you can dodge and like land damage at the same time?
So for me, like
Let's
I
say,
feel like I don't would approach this like instead of saying that I can dodge with ult, I would just say what part of the enemy's kit is avoidable, like is like able to be dodged.
sure, but
Because that way you
like
can talk about
it
not just
helps
ult
if you have
dodging,
like,
but just footsies. Like
sure, you can talk about all that and stuff, but I'm more so talking about the specifics of the like how Kassadin has like very different tools to deal with abilities than let's say Oriana does.
yes, but both of them can use footsies to dodge Syndra Q.
Yeah, but
Kassadin's the only one
since
who can
they
use his ulti
don't
to do
need
it.
to both use it, their way of approaching certain matchups will be insanely different.
Well, okay.
And
You think
like how you beat like how you beat Rumble will be very different on Kassadin and Oriana.
I mean,
Even
they're
though
both
it
gonna
might
play
still
around
be
Z.
his E cooldown.
But okay, I think we're getting out slightly off base, but your champion and how you play against things is going to be different. Like, always, yes. But the core aspects of what the enemy needs to succeed will usually be the same.
Sure.
Like, you're talking about on Kassadin, your usage of your Q and R to dodge things or avoid damage. That's an aspect of your champion's offensive pattern.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that's going to be consistent when playing against you.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's more
Absolutely.
like understanding what your enemy wants to do.
Yeah,
That's why
I
it's
mean,
so
it's
hard to
understanding
like
what
play.
your enemy and what you want to do.
Yeah, like most players understand what they want to do on their champions, but knowing what
Yeah,
your enemy wants to do
yeah.
is the hard part.
But also like how the two interact. I feel like it's not entirely true because a lot of players actually don't understand, especially when it comes to like high-low players giving bad advice to lower level players. I think a lot of that comes from like I assume that people know that they want to use their Q like reactively. I assume that people want to use their ult to like dodge something. And when I give the generic advice of like, this is what you think about against Yon, I might as a high-low player assume that yeah they will just do the reactive ability usage to that.
So
But actually, I found that most players that actually play against these champions, by just knowing what their like offensive capabilities or what their trade patterns are, they are still unable to punish it
can I give an example?
because they don't know how they play. Like, yeah, let's say
like I know I want to say one thing real quick. But like I would say,
Sure.
can I give an example of something? Because I think what you're referring to is when I say players know what they want to do, like I mean like they want to block a stun with Fiora's parry.
Sure.
But I'm not saying that players don't understand. Like, okay, I've been hit by an Aatrox W. I can wait for the repull to go off to guarantee the stun,
Yeah.
or I can sliding parry. Like what you're talking about is like I call it like intuitive usage. It's like as Echo knowing that you can R through your W and it'll still stun, or knowing
Yeah.
as
Or else
Camille like you can fast E off the
yeah.
wall or E
Yeah.
flash.
Yeah.
And like these are things that they're not like obvious. They're really not obvious.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's
But
obvious to
they're
a high-low player.
yeah, they're like it's not even obvious. Like I see people comment on like my Camille guide, like they see things they never even knew about. And they have like 2 million
Sure.
mastery points.
Yeah. But like when you talk to like a player that's like an actual high-low player, like GM plus.
I mean, I think one of the people who commented was actually in GM.
No, like I believe it. I'm saying like 90% of the time, like what they think is basic is insanely complex for the average player. Like when
I mean,
I
I
start
can
playing a
attest to that,
champion, like sure,
but I don't think that's related to rank.
I think it's related to like the levels of champ mastery you know is capable of, like you know you're capable of. When you're a challenger player,
Well,
you
okay,
actually are like already thinking in very like deep depths about like how you trade. Like you
so actually,
understand
watch this.
intuitively that you're like
Let's go back to the post. There's a video that perfectly explains this. Some highly elo players play brain off. Like their autopilot is just so good. I think
yeah,
Curtis describes this as when players are misplaying, but they just have perfect hands, essentially.
sure.
Like just being good with hands, like you can make bad plays and get away with it. Like this is a
Yeah.
quick 40-second clip. Like let's take a look at it, and this will show a good example of like what I'm referring to.
Okay.
All right, we're playing ranked. Let's have some fun. I forgot I'm playing ranked. I can do dumb.
R1 on video.
If I just out aim everyone, then it's a good time, right? I'm improving as a player. I'm improving as a player. 100% I am. Wow, I could play the game like this? Holy sh! This is crazy. I love Valorant. Wow, Valorant is such a great, fantastic game. Let me just turn off my brain and just utilize my full aiming ability instead of playing the game normally. Calling, I'm just gonna swing.
It's a bit, it's kind of facetious and like satirical, but he makes the point of like how if you're skilled, you could just out execute people.
Yeah, I mean, if you dodge every Zerat ability,
like think of Yasuo players. I think are really like well known for this actually. And nothing against Yasuo, but like they have like I know a lot of Yasuo players I've seen who are just like they're purely going off their mechanics is their only way they're going.
yeah, I mean, you can be in a bad state, and if you like really, if you play against a Zerat and you dodge every single skill shot, like you will likely win.
Well, I mean, I'm not even talking about just dodging. I'm talking about players who can just do gross mechanical things with their champions.
Right.
Like Aurelia is another champion like this. Whereas if you know how to like just do the hands, you don't have to be able to explain it. You just have to be able to execute it.
I think this is true to a certain extent. And I mean, you can get a very good autopilot, but even like you will not be in like challenger without like trading correctly, which will come from like I can autopilot think about cooldowns and punish them without like really
I
like
think
having
that,
it in
like
my brain.
one thing I want to say is I feel like Kassadin is like so opposite of this style though.
Sure, but I can also do like other champs. It doesn't matter. Like the point I'm making is that you can play brains off into certain like the point I'm making is that a challenger player's autopilot already considers these things on autopilot. Like brain of gameplay might mean that you're taking a fight when you should not be taking a fight because there's an objective in 30 seconds, and if you die, the game is over.
Yeah.
But if you win it, like, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Just be better.
Yeah. And
I mean, I think like this is how Korea plays, isn't it?
Maybe.
They're
I haven't
like
played in Korea,
that
so
region is
I
notorious
don't
for
know.
being flippy.
Sure, maybe. I literally have no clue. I haven't played on Korea. I didn't experience it for myself.
I mean, have
I
you
know
watched
that
any
on
streams of it?
EOS, like on solo queue, not enough to like form an opinion. I would have to experience it for myself because I don't have an emotional connection to like
Why do you?
Korean solo queue games.
So, like, I want to bring this steer the conversation back then, but like, part of this discussion is the ability to discern without having to experience it by like observation. Like when the guy
I'm
talks
not
about like looking
looking
with
at
your
Korean
eyes, you
games.
have to be able to
No,
like tell like from what you see.
I'm not looking at Korean games. Like I haven't looked at I think a single solo queue game in Korea in years.
Okay.
With eyes that actually looked at like mid to late game like
I mean, we're talking
flippiness
about
or
early.
whatever. I'm talking about purely late game.
Well, okay, coin flipping gameplay, just like mechanics max style, that happens from like level 1.
Sure.
They don't usually save it for the last like couple minutes. They save it like they're going
Oh
out
no,
the
like
gate with it.
I'm like when I made the example of like when an objective is up and you're taking a risk, that's like that like specifically I made with like a late game situation in mind.
Something like I know about like really coin flipping gameplay is that usually you won't be in a neck and neck game and like having an objective coming up late game because like players who are playing this kind of like mechanics max style,
Flippy style, they're either ahead
they
or
flipped
behind,
it from
yeah.
level 1.
Yeah.
Like so the advantage they'll build up is huge. Like by the time they're at that late game objective, the score is like 30 to 10.
More like 30 to 30. But
No,
yeah,
because if
I know
they're
what
like
you mean.
actually if players are getting away with the mechanics max, it's usually a steamroll. It's players who you see go like 20-0. Or 0-12.
Yeah, or like 10 and 10 because like half the time it worked out and half the time it didn't.
Not because in my experience, mechanics max players, they're usually good enough that if they win the early fights, they get fed and then they're gonna get like just keep snowballing. The trouble is if they don't
I
win the
feel
fights.
like let's say Yasuo players are like very mechanically good.
Not all of them, but some are. Some of them are in a
Yeah,
different
I
league.
mean the Yasuo players that are very mechanically good and they get a lead early. Like they give one shutdown on like an overstay before an objective because they just like mechanics max play brain off. They get caught out once and then the enemy comes back. And now they have to literally like actually
I
try
mean,
their best in order to win.
I think that it's not just that black and white. Usually the Yasuo players, it's when they lose early.
It's not black and white, of course, but
because the thing is, like, are you basing this off of your personal game experience or no?
Yeah.
Because remember, you're playing a comeback champ though.
Sure.
Whereas not all comps can do that.
I'm playing a comeback champ that's very weak into Yasuo, so yeah.
Yeah, but I'm saying late game, if he insta shutdown and you pick it up, you can come back off that.
Yeah, I mean,
not every comp can. Not every champion's capable of that. Just shut down.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, I think we're actually hitting pretty long this few times, so I want to wrap this up.
Yeah.
Let's read if there's any other comments here. So, okay, the guy does pro analysis of coaching learning ranks. Consistently highlight is that having intuitive understanding of gameplay does not translate to awareness of understanding of gameplay. Furthermore, very few players are aware of their gameplay while simultaneously possessing the skills to convey what they're doing. In his review of Tens, Wu Hinge would often advise people to mute him, observe what he's doing, and never listen to his comments. Tens is a great player, but his actions in game often directly contradict what he's saying. That's the guy we just watched.
Yeah.
I recall at one point Wu Hinge breaking down a clip and stating at no point is he taking a fight that's anywhere near a 50-50 here. He's also pathing well with regard to expected positions around the map. Basically, the guy has a galaxy mental stack, so he can just play with flow, but if you're listening to him, he's not playing the game here. So it's saying his actions all made sense, but what he's talking about is not.
Yeah.
And let's see here. Wuhenjoy went from plat to ascendant in 6 months. As true as you said, a good player does not automatically translate to being a good teacher. Even Curtis and Nathan are not the best players in the world, but you're hard to fresh coach on their level. Yep, okay. Now there's Wuhenj really. People meme on him for being able to not being able to
I mean, sometimes like you see it in league as well. Like sometimes people literally say like, I'm just gonna limit test it, and like if I int, I int. And
Mhm.
sometimes they int, but they always make those plays when there's like no objective on the map, or like they cannot lose the game off of it. And that's like also like there's so much risk assessment and everything going into like the autopilot fights and like the everything that, like, let's say you see an IRL king, and sometimes he actually loses the play, right?
Yeah, those happen.
Like
Like
even
not
even
everyone sees
those
them, but
plays,
they
like,
happen.
yeah, and even those plays when they happen, like they don't single-handedly lose the game because he's not making them when they can single-handedly lose the game.
I mean, he probably does sometimes.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
I'm
probably
not
rare,
saying
but it does
it's
happen.
perfect.
I think it's important
But
when
like,
we have these conversations. Is like this is a conversation where we actually have to be acknowledging to the fact that those situations do occur. They're
oh yeah,
still
for
human.
sure.
It's going to happen 1 in 100 games, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, sure.
But
I think there is a point where mistakes like that just don't happen anymore.
no, I feel like it's important
Not
to like
that caliber of mistakes, or like very rarely, yeah.
yeah, it's very rare,
Really,
yes.
really rarely.
Quick caveat because this is actually slightly related. I recently have had actually like started to finally like climb rating in chess. Like
Yeah.
not that high, but like I climbed up 200 rating from where I was previously. And the biggest thing I realized that let me do it was just that I stopped making game losing plays as often. Like I don't do it in most all my games now, like at least if I can. Like and that alone let me start climbing.
Yeah, I mean, I think like especially in chess, like the early climb is mostly about like
Learning how to not
hanging
lose the game for
pieces,
yourself.
not hanging pieces, not like blundering like
Yeah,
checkmates, not like
exactly.
blundering forts
Learning
and
what a
stuff
threat
like that.
looks like.
Yeah, exactly.
So like once I started to learn all that, like I started actually winning games. Like at the last 7 days, I'm like 20 wins and 6 losses.
Nice. What's
So
your
it's like
rating now?
611, that up from 407.
Okay.
Like I started at 500, and then I just started like I blundered a lot of games in my learning process because like I learned by failing. I like to say.
Yeah.
And like it paid off in the end because all the failures I understood like okay, why did I lose here? What happened? What is this threat that like occurred? And now I can spot them when I play.
Yeah.
Like
I
I
mean,
learned
that's
an
good.
opener, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, hit the highest rating I have so far.
Nice.
But I'm trying to think about that for League though. Is like just learning how to not make game losing plays is important.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times, like especially with my loyal clients, I see that a lot where a lot of people in their elo like just loses a game through like bad roams.
Mm-hmm.
It's so common. Like every single game, you see like someone roam down, lose 3 waves, give like 3 plates, and just lose the game.
I think the key though is if you make those game losing plays, you just got to learn from them. So it's like don't discourage players from making any like kind of bad plays. Like don't try and like make them play too safe. Like so that they don't make any mistakes ever, but like when they make a mistake, they need to like be able to learn from why it was a mistake.
I think it's more so like you have to select an area where they deliberately make mistakes, and the rest of the areas you want to minimize them.
Yeah, that's fair. That's actually a good way to put it.
So like let's say if I want to like
the freezing example we gave earlier.
Let's say teach someone to roam, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's use the same example.
Okay.
If you want them to learn from roaming, then you will be like, okay, there are some rules that you should follow, and you should still review every single roam you do, even the good ones. And then
deliberately like
you
review them specifically.
Yeah, exactly. And then you will review like, okay, you will review like how you were panning your camera, how you were actually playing out the roam, but then you will also review like what was the cost of the roam, what did your enemy get from it, right? And then you just see like, okay, actually I lost like 2 waves and like 2 plates here, and that lost me the game because I'm just like
something really important you just said there is you're identifying metrics to measure.
Yeah.
So when players, you need to have a way to judge whether something was successful.
Yeah.
So they need to have like a metric of, okay, how do I judge if this was a good reset? How many minions did you lose in the time you're gone?
Yeah. It's actually one of the main keys to like, that's actually one of the main keys, key rules of like good advice.
Is it has to be measurable.
Clients I identified. It has to be simple, but it has to be measurable, because if they can measure it,
they can see it for themselves.
Then it's something that they can truly like understand and measure, and
they can use it basically, because then it's like, okay, I can apply it game after game, like without you being there.
And that also disconnects like their like self-assessment from winning to like actually measuring the thing that they are improving at.
It gets them detached
Which
from
is really
focusing on just the
important.
wins.
Yeah, and it like becomes more input focused, right?
Mhm.
And once
What
it's
they
input
can control.
focused, then they can reflect, and then then they can control it, and then they can track their like actual improvement, and it actually makes people feel way better about like trying to learn about the game.
It distracts you from like the fact that you might lose a game because of other people sometimes.
Right.
If you
Right.
see that you executed this like thing well, you can see the improvement.
Right. Exactly.
All right, I think this is a good place to wrap up, though.
I think it's
This has been a good
time to
talk.
wrap up
Thank
as
you for
well.
joining me, Aledos.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Till next time.